Good morning, everybody. We've reached 11:30 exactly, so I'd like us to get going. We've got a very full program for this morning. My name is Linda Godfrey. I'm the manager of the Waste Research Development and Innovation Roadmap Implementation Unit, and hopefully you can see on the screen in front of you our agenda for this morning. It's a great pleasure to join you all virtually this morning for the release of our 2021-22 Waste Roadmap Annual Report. According to the agenda, I will be passing it over to Dr. Henry Roman from the Department of Science and Innovation, who has oversight and is responsible for the Waste Roadmap, just to present the highlights of the last financial year. And then we're very pleased to have with us this morning 3 of our grant holders whose projects came to an end during the past financial year. Professor Rini Schenk from the University of the Western Cape, Professor Annie Chimpango from Stellenbosch University, and Professor Harro von Blotnitz from the University of Cape Town. So with that, let me pass it over directly to Dr. Roman to present the highlights of the 2021-22 annual report. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor Godfrey, for that introduction. I was going to share my screen quickly. Yeah, so as introduced, I'm with the Department of Science and Innovation, where I'm Director for Environmental Services and Technologies and have oversight of the implementation of the Waste RDI roadmap. So I'm going to briefly take us through some highlights of the last financial year of the implementation. So just quickly an overview of what the roadmap's about, where we are investing our funds, trends that have been observed since the roadmap's been implemented since 2015-16, and a brief overview of our grant projects, the students, the researchers as well, our South African research chairs, the DSI, CSIR, NRF research chairs, and some of the research outputs. So this is just to remind some of us about the core focus of our Waste RDI roadmap. And as you can see, we've got how we're looking at supporting national policy and strategy, and this is how we're looking at improving management of waste as well as increasing diversion of waste away from landfill to more value-adding opportunities. So the mandate of the DSI is human capital development or skills building, research and development, as well as innovation. And our roadmap has developed around 6 focus areas or clusters, as well as 5 priority waste streams. So you can see the system we're trying to create through the application or the implementation of the roadmap. Now, how we've invested and our planned as well as our actual investment. So the allocation of the funding across the roadmap 6 clusters over the past 7 years is pretty much in line with the original intention of the Waste RDI roadmap. You can see the largest share of the funding, around 55%, was planned for investment into technology solutions, and the actual spend to date is 61%. For us, waste logistics performance is still an underfunded area, 4% in actual compared to a planned expenditure of around 8%. But we are struggling to find waste logistics research projects that meet the criteria for funding under the Waste RDI roadmap. Here we're looking at the trends over the last 7 years of implementation. So you can see we've been through quite a difficult economic climate in South Africa over the period, but fortunately, we've managed to maintain our total investment in waste research through our annual grant transfers. And even though the total value of our grant projects on the books in the last financial year declined, the number of projects that we funded has increased to its highest number since our first year of implementation in 2015. This is actually due to our several micro grant funded projects that started in 2021. That's an initiative of this program whereby we are looking to address transformation within the university sector to bring on board the lesser known universities or your historically disadvantaged institutions. The increase in the number of grant projects funded has also translated into an increase in the number of researchers and students that are actually supported on these projects. You'll notice that there was a dip in the number of our students who completed their studies experienced in 2020, 2021. And this was due to COVID. And this has recovered in this current year as universities reopened after COVID restrictions had been lifted. Also, we've managed to maintain the number of scientific publications and technology packages over the period as well. Looking then at this thematic spread of current grant projects, the Waste Roadmap held 34 grant projects under its portfolio. I'm not going to go through all that's on the slide. Importantly to note that there are a total of 14 universities and science councils that received grant funding within the year under discussion. Also, you'll hear today about the 3 grant projects that were successfully completed within that financial year from Professors Schenk, Chimpango, and von Blotnitz. Professor Schenk will speak to understanding societal behavior in order to reduce and divert waste going to landfill. Professor Chimpango will be speaking to organic waste as a bioresource for production of novel cellulose nanocomposites, and then Professor von Blotnitz will speak to assessing economy-wide prospects for a more sustainable circular economy in South Africa. If you look, the Waste Roadmap grant projects that were funded during the 2021-22 financial year supported 60 undergraduates as well as postgraduates, partially or fully funded. These grant projects remain an important mechanism for building capacity at the postgraduate level in South Africa, which is an important pillar of the implementation of the Waste RDI roadmap. You'll notice we have quite a good spread in terms of gender of students that are funded or supported. The largest spread comes by degree and for masters, and we also are supporting some international students from the continent. However, 79% of the students receiving support are South African. We'd also like to take this particular opportunity to congratulate all of the Waste Roadmap funded students that graduated this past year. And this is just an illustration of some of the students that have graduated from the program. In terms of grant-funded researchers, we've managed to support 162 researchers and collaborators. That's also the highest number of researchers supported on grant projects since implementation of the Waste Roadmap. You'll also notice, again, a good balance in terms of gender. We're still looking to increase, of course, the female part of the, or to increase the gender equity, let me put it like that. We also have 2 research chairs under the South African Research Chairs Initiative, and our SACHI chairs remain focused on achieving their objectives, which is to evidence the waste sector's contribution to South Africa's greenhouse gas emissions. This is done by Professor Christina Troyes, as well as in better understanding the relationship between South African citizens and waste management, which is done by Professor Rini Schenk, who you'll hear from a bit later. We've also established research advisory committees around both chairs, and that's to assist us to review and guide on the research being undertaken. In terms of outputs in the year, We produced 49 final deliverables during the period. And these include a variety of outputs. These are from dissertations, journal papers, technical reports, conference papers, presentations, and briefing notes. Yeah, the number for each of those is noted there. In terms, this is just a quick recap of a visual representation. And what you'll note, what I'd like to just quickly look at is our downloaded publications of the waste roadmap website. You're looking at the waste picker integration guidelines, the informal sector, trends in waste management, food loss and waste, valorization of waste chicken feathers. It gives you an idea of what interests people in the work being done. And you can note the top 5 countries that are accessing, besides South Africa, is the United States, Great Britain, India, and Indonesia. So very interesting spread as well of countries that are accessing the work being done in South Africa. Looking at the other aspects of highlights, so you've had 11 new projects awarded as projects funded, new and existing, and we've received 43 million rand in new grant proposals. Of course, we don't have all that funding, so you can see we've committed 25 million for new and ongoing projects, and you can access this report and the other previous year's report at the URL that's shown on the screen. So to conclude, just a few comments from my side. In 2012, we started to develop the waste RDI roadmap, and we had a series of HCD workshops to understand our skills landscape better. The conclusion from that work at that time was that a waste management professional skills development program at university level is required. And since then, we've enabled an honors degree and 2 master's degrees at different universities in order to address that particular requirement. We've also graduated 46 postgrads since implementation of the roadmap in 2015, and a further 52 are in the process of completing their studies. The other aspect is when the waste RDI roadmap development was concluded, we recognized the need to better understand the societal aspects of waste management, and that led to 2 major outputs that we've had. One being the contribution to the development of the first guideline document looking at the integration of waste pickers into the formal economy with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the environment. And then also looking at the climate impacts that poor waste management cannot be overemphasized. And there we have a SARCHI chair in waste and climate change to address what is the problem. And I forgot to mention, we also have a SARCHI chair on waste and society so that we can better understand the societal aspects of waste management. What lies ahead for us is we've had 7 years of implementation of the waste RDI roadmap, and this has really laid a foundation for what is to come. So the DSI is in the process of establishing a national science, technology, and innovation for circular economy strategy, and this clearly signals the intent from our department. We've recognized circular economy as a new growth area for South Africa, and that signals an intent to transform the economy, and the role that the DSI has in that transformation is critical. And the reason we say that is because science, technology, and innovation is the foundation upon which evidence-based policy making to enable that transformation will be made. With that, I'd like to thank all the researchers, all the partners, and in particular Professor Godfrey for her leadership on the program. And I'll hand back to her now. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Henry, for a very, very compact but detailed oversight of the past financial year, and hopefully everybody who's joining us on the Teams link this morning and on the YouTube channel will appreciate the fact that it's been a busy year, but I think a successful year in terms of strengthening South Africa's waste research, development and innovation. So with that, we will certainly share the link again towards the end of this session where you can download the annual report. You can take your time and go through it in more detail and read up further about the various initiatives and outcomes that Henry has referred to. With that, I'd like to pass over to the first of our grant holders who completed the research grant project in 21-22, Professor Schenk from the University of the Western Cape. Thanks. Over to you, Rini.
Thank you very much, Linda. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the Clean City Town project was completed between 2019 and 2021. And I think this project is the grassroots researchers. It's not it's not in the laboratories, it's not in the offices. It was really grassroots work. And I think firstly, I just want to see that it's, okay. I want to thank the Department of Science and Innovation and all of the funders, in particular Professor Godfrey, as well in the CSIR roadmap, for funding a research like this, because I think it's not often that we can get the funding for grassroots research, and we really appreciate that. And my team members are acknowledged because this research cannot be done alone. You will understand why. And then I need to acknowledge also the universities, the different municipalities that were involved in the research, and NGOs, and specifically the participating households in the different areas. So the aim of the study, as it says there, was to really understand what is happening in communities and the relationship with waste and waste management. And to do that, communities are complex. And in my own mind, I thought it's building a puzzle, because there's no one answer and there's not one person that can give you the answer. So we were talking to many people to be able to understand that. I just need to go back to the one person that was saying that South Africa really has a problem because it's very dirty. So it was a multiple case studies that we follow. We were engaging with 4 municipalities, Polokwane, Kopanong, Rantam, and Drakenstein municipality, spread out through South Africa, and I will soon explain why we used the different municipalities. So just to give you a brief overview of all the interviews that we did household surveys, we did household waste characterization studies in 230 households throughout the 4 areas. We did some illegal dumping mapping, buyback center interviews, waste picker interviews, and then our qualitative data collect was with also household interviews, where we tried to understand how they view dumping and littering in their areas, taxi drivers, street vendors, and all the groups that you can see there. And maybe just a very important point that I want to make is we really used people from the communities to assist us with the data collection, which was really an enriching experience. So just to mention that during this time, it was COVID time. So in the middle of our research, or actually in the beginning of our research, COVID came and we had to work around that. So we, after the hard lockdown, we started going back to the communities with the assistance of the communities as well. So maybe just first to give you an overview of the different communities that we were involved in. We used Drakenstein municipality because it's overall a good municipality. They have weekly door-to-door waste collection by the municipality, and they also consist of mini drop-offs to help communities with their waste. And then Golfinia West is also, maybe just to make a note that most of the communities or all the communities we involved in were low-income communities, because they are the communities that struggle most with their waste. So Golfinia West they also have regular door-to-door waste collection, but the municipality cannot provide bins and bags to the community, so the community have to provide that themselves. The Kopanong municipality was a bit of a difficult one for us. This community is supposed, according to the IDP, they're supposed to have weekly waste collection, but due to the struggling municipality, and the municipality was put under administration, no waste management was actually done in the community, and it was taken over by the concerned citizens. And they took responsibility for the waste management in the area. So it is between the municipality and depending if there are diesel available to take the waste away. And then the last community we interviewed, there's absolutely no waste collection at all. It is a relatively rural area, and they have to look after their own waste. So just to give you an idea, so I'm going to share with you that we mapped all the illegal dumping spots in the different areas, and that you can see what it looks like. So this is Matselapata. This is the area where there's absolutely no waste management. This is the two townships in the Free State, in Philippopolis, and where they have the waste collection that is now done by the concerned citizens. And you can also still see a lot of dumping sites around the communities. Calvinia West is an area where there are waste management. The municipality is regularly there. And this was the amount, I think it was close to 73 dumping spots that we could pick up in the community. And this is in Bokweni, so this is in Drakenstein municipality. This was the amount of illegal dump sites that we could map in the area. So where's the problem? Because we can see that despite the fact that some of the municipalities do deliver their waste management, there's still a lot of illegal dumping. The only difference is actually that in the areas where there's waste management, in Calvinia and in Drakenstein, they clean up the illegal dumping, while in Philippopolis and in Matselapata, the illegal dumping is not cleaned up. It's just becoming more and more. So somewhere something must be wrong. And I call it the square pegs and the round holes, because something is not working. So just to give you an idea of the waste storage problem, what the communities have if they're not provided with anything. On the left-hand side, you can see the bins that are that the community have to collect themselves in oil bins. The middle one is in the Free State, where people are used the bags from the dog food or from the milli meal that they use, or any form of thing that they need to put it out with. And if it is not collected, they throw it in the foul. This is what they told us. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the bags full of nappies that people don't know where to keep it. There's no space or place where they can actually keep it, so they hang it on the trees. This is, I think, the major thing that what stood out for us is the waste fractions that we find in the illegal dump sites, like clothing. That was an interesting one. The bulky waste, the garden waste, the glass bottles was a major issue. And then, of course, the nappies in the two lower ones. The major aspect that came out is what people were sharing as well is specifically in lower income areas, that they don't have the transport to remove it. So if the municipality doesn't support them, there's no way that these things can go to the landfill sites or wherever it needs to go. So this was, I think, one of the major things. And then another major aspect that we find in the areas was backyard structures. Many of the municipalities does not provide or does not give any waste management support to backyard structures. They give support to the household, and if the household cannot manage the up to 9 backyard structures that might be in the area, in the yard, it is not necessarily, then you will get what you can see there, sort of this dumping. They need to get rid of the waste because there's no other way that they can do that. And I think I want to share this as well. This was some mini drop-offs or skips sometimes are provided by the municipalities, but it's in the end not necessarily definitely well managed, and it became actually a problem. The solution to the problem becomes a problem in the communities. And I think we can talk about fairness, and we can talk about inequalities that create problems for the communities. So this is just a quick summary that I would like to share with you that we find the red ones of all the reasons that people gave to us why there is littering and dumping, the ones in black indicate is on par with what is on international happens on the international scene. Value systems in terms of lack of appropriate infrastructure, lack of education and awareness. These reasons are also in the international literature. The ones in red, in particular, is linked to the South African context. We couldn't find any of these in the international literature. The people experience really a non-caring and non-engaged government, a government that does not care. Littering and dumping leads to job creation is one of the major ones, and I think we didn't want to believe it in the beginning, but it came out more or less in every community. And then I think the non-collaboration, or I can rather call it divided communities, is also one of the reasons for the littering and dumping that was given by the communities. So we've concluded that there will be no silver bullet to attend to this problem, but it is rather a wicked problem. And we need to really focus on it is complex, systemic, process-orientated approaches that we need to attend to. We need barefoot or grassroots practitioners. We need to look on collaborative strategic interventions that are managed and monitored and evaluated. And I think the major focus I want to put on participatory and co-design solutions that we need to implement in the communities. Then I just want to give my last comment that I want to make is just a little bit of impact that it had on the communities. So it created our involvement in the community already created some awareness. The community started with some initiatives. As you can see, these Philippians fun walk and clean up. At least it started to people being excited about cleaning their environment, their willingness to participate in sorting at source with our waste characterization studies. We asked the people to divide their waste in 10 categories, and they did it diligently and brilliantly. And just an interesting last comment from one of our field workers who wrote to Charlotte, my co-worker, and he was telling us he's now started to collect waste, recyclables. Thank you very much, and this is the end of the presentation. Maybe just a final comment to say that all the reports and articles are on the Waste Roadmaps website, so if any are interested to read some of it, you are most welcome.
Thank you very much, Rini, for that insightful presentation. I was going to reiterate your point that all of the research deliverables, the reports, etc., are available for public access on the Waste Roadmap website. We're not taking questions from our virtual audience today, so I do encourage you, if you'd like to engage with any of our researchers post this workshop, please feel free to reach out to them. And I think, Rini, the key message that the kind of the take home that I'm getting from your presentation is very often we try to address waste management issues through technology solutions that we can engineer our way out of this. And it just highlights the complexity of the human element, of the social element of human behavior when it comes to waste management. And again, very often we try to deal with the waste management problem through a single solution, and that's not always necessarily possible. So I do hope your research continues to be funded and that we continue to address this major challenge facing not only South Africa, but the rest of the continent as well, around where we don't have waste collection services, this issue of illegal dumping, and very often associated with it, the issue of open burning. So with that, let me pass over to our second presenter this morning, Professor Annie Chimpango from Stellenbosch University. Annie, if you are able to share your screen. Wonderful. If you can pop it onto full screen mode and share your camera so that everyone can see you and we can get going. I can't hear you, Annie, so if you can just remember to unmute yourself. There, perfect. We can hear you.
And can you see me?
And we can see you. Wonderful. The
Okay,
floor is
all
yours.
right.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I'm going to be presenting on the organic waste side of things. The project that we are handling, we are looking at using organic waste as a bioresource for the production of cellulose nanocomposites. This is just because we realized that with organic waste, it's not being utilized to the maximum, to get the value to the maximum. So there were two types of organic waste that we focused on. So the first one was based on wheat residues. About 2 million tons of wheat is produced in South Africa per year. And when we look at the wheat residues, when you are processing wheat grain, 1 kg would generate about 1.5 kgs of wheat straw, and also about 0.2 kgs of wheat bran. So, and when we look at the current utilization of these residues, we find that they are very minimal. Most of them is for animal feeding, and very few, innovative way of utilizing the waste. So in this case, we realized that there is high demand for products such as nanocellulose. And if we are to look at the composition of this waste, we find that there are just so many products that we can actually obtain. So in this case, we are looking at the cellulose composition of the residues. So in the wheat bran, we find that okay, the cellulose composition is not that much; it's about 10%. But when we look at the starch, it's about 30%, and we are looking at hemicellulose 22%. And there are also some small components that can be obtained from this waste, which have got high value on the market. So the same with the wheat straw, we realized that when we look at the composition, the cellulose content is about 36%, which is closer to what you would find in some of the wood sources. And also looking at lignin, which is an important component that can be obtained from these residues, that is not, being considered highly when we are looking at fractionation or valorization of this kind of waste. So based on the composition, then we looked at the ways in which we can try to obtain these compounds in higher yields, but also in their functional state. And in this case, although we were targeting the production of nanocellulose, we realized that in most cases, the methods that are used to produce nanocellulose, they disregard the other components in the residues. So for the wheat residues, looking at the wheat bran, we had to take it through a sequential process, which was optimized at each and every stage in order to make sure that we get, those labile compounds that would degrade under harsh conditions that are used to produce nanocellulose in high yields and high purity. So in this case, we focused on looking at how we can use the alkaline method. So in this case, we used alkaline conditions that would allow us to get compounds like ferulic acid from the wheat bran, and also picolinate acid from the wheat straw, in addition to hemicellulose and cellulose-rich residues that would be used for the production of the nanocellulose later. And then that process was optimized, and after obtaining the cellulose residues, then we had to use the residues to actually obtain compounds such as lignin, which we had to use the harsh conditions in order to get the lignin, and also to actually condition the residue to have high cellulose content, which would be required in our production of cellulose nanoparticles. So in the production of cellulose nanoparticles, we also had to optimize that stage in order to make sure that our nanoparticles that we obtain have got functional properties and physical properties that would allow them to be used in composites. So in this case, we looked at the hydrochloric acid treatment and also enzymatic, treatment. And this was compared to the sulfuric acid treatment in order to see, how best these new methods can compare with the conventional methods, which is the sulfuric method. So in this case, when we actually did that, we looked at the fractionation process, how the optimized condition would look like without, following the conventional process. And then we looked at the nanocellulose production as well in terms of the optimized conditions in comparison to the conventional methods. So what we found was that when we are looking at the first stage of the fractionation, we have conditions that are milder in terms of the wheat, the wheat residue, the wheat straw. We could obtain the hemicellulose of high purity and also in high yields, in addition to the phenolic compounds at temperatures, lower than 100 degrees. So for the wheat straw, we are looking at 54 degrees, and for the wheat bran, we are looking at 68 degrees, which is, something that can save a lot of energy in processing these residues. And then when we are looking at the second stage of fractionation, where we are targeting the lignin and also the residues that have got high cellulose content, there we find that, we can actually get these products, in lesser time and also using milder conditions than the conventional ones. So in this case, we were very satisfied in terms of optimizing these processes to make sure that we have processes that are friendlier to the environment, bringing towards greener, approaches. And now, when it came to the production of the nanocellulose, we had to look at the different methods. Here we considered the enzymatic method, and also looking at acid-based method, but not which is different from the sulfuric acid method, that is the conventional one. So the idea here, we needed to optimize the enzymatic method in order to make sure that there is no glucose that is being generated, because if we have lots of glucose being generated, that means we will not have, the nanocellulose. And also we needed to look at the properties of the nanocellulose. And here we are looking at the surface charge, which is very critical when it comes to the application of the nanocellulose. And also looking at the polydispersity index, which also is very important in the applications, especially when we are looking at highly sensitive applications in the pharmaceutical industry. And of course, we are looking at nano, sizes, which would give us, the nano particles that we are looking for. So here again, we found that we can actually get these nanoparticles in just less than 5 hours, and with a combination of, two types of enzymes. And when it came to the hydrochloric acid, which was an alternative to the sulfuric acid, we actually also optimized for high yield of the nanocellulose, and also looking at the morphological factors or parameters of the nanocellulose. And with that, then we found that with the hydrochloric acid, we could get these nanocellulose, in about, 7.5 hours. But of course, with the acid, we needed to do the process at a higher temperature, which was about 114 degrees Celsius. So this process was, optimized in that sense, and those are the optimal conditions that we found. And now looking at the yields and the properties of the nanocellulose that we obtained from the different methods in comparison to the conventional methods. So here, this one is the conventional methods. So on the yield side of things, we can see that we are still below what we would get from the conventional method. But when we are looking at the morphology, the size, we find that there was no difference between or among the methods. And for the surface charge measured by the zeta potential, of course, we could see that the sulfuric acid method has got the higher surface charge, and that allows the particles not to aggregate when they are being used. So that is another area that still needs improvement in order to make sure that we have high surface charge properties for the nanoparticles that we use to avoid the aggregation during application. But when we looked at the quality of the nanocellulose that was produced, one of the most important parameters is crystallinity. And here we find that when we are using the hydraulic acid, there wasn't much difference with the conventional methods. And also the enzymatic method, the crystallinity was not that bad when it comes to certain applications. So in this case, we found that we can actually produce these nanocellulose, our nanocellulose particles, together with other products. And the major advantage here is the fact that when we are using these other methods, we are able to expand the number of products that we can obtain from the wheat residues. Unlike with the sulfuric acid, which they get the other components. Now, for the second organic waste that we considered was the mango. So with the mango, we find that the mangoes are processed into different products. One of them is dry chips, but it can also be it's also being processed into different types of juice. So when we look at the waste that is being produced, although mangoes are not produced in large amounts in South Africa, about I think it's about 4,000 tons, but the waste that is generated, has got a lot of variable compounds that can be recovered and fetch high prices on the market. So when we look at the mango peels, we can have compounds such as pectin, polyphenols, and of course hemicellulose from such waste. And mango peels would constitute about 7 to 24% of the fruit. And when we are looking at the mango seed that is generated when making the dry chips, you find that it contains, cellulose, lignin, starch, and also other compounds in terms of hemicellulose and polyphenols, and even, proteins. So in this case, we also were aiming at developing methods that would actually allow us to get these products. And our basis, of course, was the composition of these segments of waste from the mango processes. So for the seed itself, we find that you can have the seed kernel, which is the inside seed, and also the husk, which is the cover. And when we look at the composition, we find that we can have about 18% of it in the form of proteins, and you can also have starch, about 34% of this, which can be recovered. And we also have 17% of the hemicellulose. And when we look at the husk as well, we find that about 18% is hemicellulose and 50% is about cellulose, which makes this mango seed husk a suitable raw material for actually producing the nanocellulose. So in this case, then, we looked at, as our objective was to develop that optimize, fractionation schemes that can allow us to produce the nanocellulose, but at the same time, looking at other products that we can obtain based on the composition. So the idea was, of course, to add value to the mango waste and also provide alternative ways of managing the mango waste, which is highly perishable. And here we looked at novel, schemes that would actually produce products with unique, properties when it comes to the application. So here we are looking at biocomposites that would be, thermostable, but also looking at the nanocellulose that we were producing. We targeted nanocellulose that would be spherical because that morphology is very important when it comes to application of the nanocellulose in industries like the pharmaceutical and also the medical industry. So when it came to now optimizing the processes, just looking at the process that was developed, we have the mango seed husk, which is with the husk and the kernel had to go through ethanol organosulf treatment in order to produce the polyphenols. And then this starch residue had to go through enzymatic hydrolysis in order to produce the starch. And that discharged residue had to go through the alkaline treatment in order to produce hemicellulose, which were either bioactive or mixed, hemicellulose. The husk was taken through the alkaline treatment in order to produce the hemicellulose, and the residue from the alkaline treatment had to go through the high shear organosulf homogenization in order to actually get lignin. And then that residue that was rich in cellulose was the one that was subjected to organic acids in order to produce the cellulose nanoparticles. So here again, these organic acids were used as alternatives to the sulfuric acid that is normally used in the production of nanoparticles. So yes, in terms of the products that we obtained, we found that the products were indeed of high quality, like the polyphenols. They would have, antioxidant activity greater than 80%. And when we are looking at the starch, we could get starch as 90% of the starch from the residues. And also when we look at the hemicellulose, we would get hemicellulose about 50-60%, in terms of the yield. And also in terms of the molecular weight, which is another important, factor when it comes to the application of these hemicellulose. So in this case, we found that our process actually managed to improve, the conventional processes in obtaining these compounds. And from the seed husk, we obtained the hemicellulose, the lignin, as well as the cellulose. And looking at the purities that we obtained for the hemicellulose, we had 79% purity. And the type of hemicellulose that was obtained, was highly thermostable, which means could be used in making biocomposite that would withstand, high temperatures. And then we had the lignin, 96% purity, and the yield as high as 70%. And then when we compared with non-assisted organosulf lignin, we find that it wasn't, that different. We had about 69% with 95% purity. So we found that, it is possible actually to generate lignin in high purity, which is suitable for many applications. And for the other products, for the nanocellulose themselves, we also use different organic acids, formic acid, acetic acid, and also sulfuric acid as just as a baseline to compare in terms of the qualities of the nanocellulose that we produced. So the most important feature that we realized that indeed it was very easy to get nanocellulose that had spherical, morphology. As I indicated, spherical morphology is actually very important when it comes to applications in high sensitive applications in the medical and pharmaceutical industries. And then looking at the hemicellulose and the nanocellulose and the polyphenols that were produced, we were able to form self-supporting, composites with different, physical features and parameters. So here are just some of the, composites that were formed. And here we are showing, the spherical nature of the nanocellulose that were produced compared to what is produced using the sulfuric acid, which are more rod-like, nanoparticles. And in terms of the project impact, there were so many, high impact, so many publications that were, published in high impact factor journals. So here is just a list, as it has already been mentioned. I think these are already publicly available, that can be accessed. And one other product, probably I'm giving away, it's a book chapter that we are also trying to publish from the work. And there have been other projects that have emerged out of this project. We have one that is looking at the economic viability and sustainability of food processing in the biorefineries, and also fractionation of the agro waste into biopolymers and bioactive compounds for active food packaging. And there have been students that have been trained, PhD level, master's level, as well as at postdoc level, and other final year students that have been doing some aspects of the project as their final year project. So yeah, that's my story, and we are very thankful to the funding that we obtained and also the support that we received from the university and of course from the National Research Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annie, for your presentation. I think it highlights quite succinctly two important issues in my mind. I think the first one is the fact that the Waste Roadmap has funded to a very large degree research in organic waste beneficiation, given the fact that it's one of the largest general waste streams generated in South Africa, including agri and agro-processing waste. And I think the second key point is that one of the main ways of diverting waste away from landfill is by unlocking value from the waste. And so a critical element of the waste roadmap is to unlock high value end use markets through R&D and innovation. And I think those two issues were perfectly captured in your presentation, and we look forward to seeing how your research develops and further unlocks opportunity for the agri and agro-processing industry in South Africa. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to pass over to our final speaker for this afternoon, Professor Harro van Blotnitz from the University of Cape Town. Harro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Linda. And I just need to get to full screen. I think. Is that working, Linda?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you, Harro.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, we were in micro and nano scale a moment ago. We're going to mega scale now, the whole economy in a few pictures. My pleasure to present the results of the study where we did a material flow analysis of the whole South African economy to try to get a handle on how circular or not it is and what kind of indicators one should be measuring circularity ambitions by. Circular economy is increasingly in the discourse, and Dr. Roman made the point that this is very important for policy now, and that DSI is putting a fair bit of attention to building the human resource base and also the technological capability to really take ambition and talk about circularity into reality. Our work, maybe just, yeah, to acknowledge this work was done between us here at the University of Cape Town and a team from the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna. The BOKU is a German abbreviation for soil science, Bodenkunde, and Vienna and the Austrian science is really known in the field of material flow analysis, and was a great opportunity for us to work with the best in the world on this topic. The approach really is built on viewing an economy as a living organism that has a metabolism. So it's about understanding the sources and the sinks and the environment in which it all happens. And so this idea of a metabolism is then applied to the whole country's economy, where we need to quantify the imports and the exports, understand the domestic extraction, outflows back to the environment, and then what goes on within the socioeconomic system to a sufficient level of detail to really understand whether there is circularity or not. Just some numbers to sort of on the South African system estimated, and we know how many people there are, 260 million, but the population in mass, the livestock, and all our artifacts. So our built environment is, 100 times heavier or 200 times heavier than the people and the animals combined, as a sort of starting teaser in terms of numbers. The whole approach is mass balanced, so that's where we as chemical engineers bring one of our core tools to it to make sure it is rigorous, and the numbers actually that you draw together from diverse sources are reconciled. The scheme of material flows that we use very briefly before I get to results is shown here on this slide. And at some stage it may be useful to actually have a pointer going because there's so much on the slide. So let me just get that laser pointer here. Yeah, so there's the trade balance data that we need, and then the data on extraction from mining and farming and fishing. And yeah, then we also need to know what is recycled. We have the processed material that then splits into material uses and energetic uses, which include not just what's burnt in power stations or in car engines, but also what's burnt in human bodies and animal bodies. That's all energetic use. And then we have the material use, some of it which is short-lived, like the packaging, which gives us headaches, and others is long-lived, that adds to our infrastructure, our structures, the stocks that we use, which then after a certain time are discarded, demolished. All of that combines to end-of-life wastes, emissions and vapor, and some of those can be circulated by society. Others end up as solid liquid outputs or emissions in nature where they cause damage. Ecosystems recycle a certain part as well. We understand that circularity has both a socio-technical cycling and the ecological cycling components that need to be understood. On the ecological cycling, we look at things like the regeneration rate, the status of the geochemical cycles, ecosystem quality, and fertilizer and pesticides use and fossil use, which all impact renewability. And then on the socio-technical cycling, we can look at it either at the input side or at the output side. And essentially, one looks at what is socioeconomically cycled, what is ecologically cycled, and then what is non-circulated material. So those are the indicators that are developed. But let's get into just a little bit on terminology before we get to result. Always important, I think, domestic extraction. We've talked about extractive waste is material that has been processed to some extent and then becomes wastes. So tailing slag, bagasse from the sugar industry, those are examples. Then there's unused extraction, which is material that's moved but not processed, and this is not counted in this assessment because it often is much larger than the extractive waste. So that's all the overburden or waste rock in the mining industry, but also the portion of maize stover that's actually left on the field. Fresh weight, dry weight, always important to know whether you're including water in your numbers or not. So for biomass, we do. For other materials, we don't. And stock building materials are those that stay in use for more than a year. Right, let's step into, if you haven't seen it yet, this is the kind of big picture result. This is the schematic of what South Africa's economy looks like. Very, very linear, very small bit of circularity around the bottom. The numbers are in millions of tons, millions of metric tons. Domestic extraction is much larger than imports. The breakdown is by a number of major material groups. Fossil fuels and associated coal mining wastes are at the bottom. Then we have industrial minerals in gray, that largely for construction purposes. We have metals in blue and wastes of mining in dark blue, and biomass in green. And as we step then through this, we see that our exports, which are very sizable, 170 million tonne, are dominated by coal and metals. Our processed materials, 746 million tonnes is the estimate. These are all for 2017, splitting into the energy use, food and feed, and technical energy up here, and the material uses. You can see how those are very different, very sort of building material oriented kind of stuff down here, but we also have a lot of throughput waste in this stream here, which is associated largely with the mining industry. Stock add, 130 million tons going into our structures and infrastructure, long-lived. The interim outputs, which combine everything that leaves the economy, the reuse and recycling at total estimated 14 million tons. Yeah, bit of waste that goes to incineration, some composting. There's some water vapor counted in here, in as much as that's generated. The emissions would be not of CO2, but of just the carbon portion of the CO2. We don't count the oxygen. Yeah, I think that gives a bit of an idea how the picture overall looks. Very linear, not a lot of circularity. Then we went a little bit deeper. Let me see at the end of this slide. Ecological cycling is bigger than socio-technical cycling. This was an area of lots of uncertainty. What proportion of our harvest can be regarded as sustainable harvest? What proportion of what we put into nature in terms of biological materials can we say is cycled by intact ecological cycles? There's a lot of uncertainty around that. So yeah, take these numbers all as being estimates, and some with larger, some with smaller uncertainty. So overall, we get a socioeconomic cycling rate of just under 2% if we count on the input side, an ecological cycling rate of about 5%, total cycling rate of about 7%. And on the output side, slightly higher, because the outputs are slightly smaller than the inputs because we keep adding stuff to the stocks, but 8.5% overall cycling rate if we count on the output end of the economy. I'm going to go a little bit more into a breakdown of the major materials that we're looking at here. One thing we had to do is just look at how much waste is there. We worked from the State of Waste report, which was for 2017, which became available about the time that we started our study. We differed slightly in its interpretation on some materials, and then we had to, just in terms of how material flow accounting works, we had to make some other corrections. So our deviations were are shown in orange there. Let's see, so we added on the municipal solid waste, those unserviced households, those pictures of dumping that you saw from Professor Schenk earlier on. The construction and demolition waste category we think is strongly underreported in official wastes, and we've got a paper published in the South African Journal of Science on that topic by now. And sewage sludge wasn't reported in the State of Waste report. Biomass we had to correct down because the bagasse that's reported as waste actually is burnt, and in terms of material flow analysis, we're only interested in the ash that results after it's burnt. Yeah, so, but yeah, the State of Waste report 2017, I have to say, much better than the 2011 effort, so that we're moving forward in understanding our waste picture in South Africa. Congrats to the authors there. And then we had to add for the material flow analysis, the extractive waste from metal mining and the extractive waste from coal mining. And yeah, very difficult to get some good numbers, especially on the latter, actually. Yeah, right. Yeah, so that gives us our end of life solid waste. Right, so that was something we had to get right. Just looking at biomass, so jumping over, what do we extract from biomass? A lot is grazed by our domestic animals, and then the primary crops are also yeah, a very dominant category, but you see other categories like the straw associated with the maize and wheat, some municipal greens there, the crop residues, Some fodder crops, particularly produced, added to the grazing, and then timber as an important bit, and then wood fuel harvesting, especially in the informal and rural sectors where people still rely on wood fuel. Okay. Yeah, the picture for biomass flows is most of those are used in an energetic sense for food and feed, but some go through as timber and paper, timber longer lived, pulp, cardboard and paper shorter lived through the economy. There's some composting. Yeah, and there's a bit of paper recycling and timber recycling, but yeah, paper recycling especially, that comes in as one of those pockets of good recycling. This was our major first finding: sizable bio-based flows at 17% of domestic extraction, and there are significant sustainability concerns about ecological cycling. Next picture is for the metal flows, very much dominated by exports. A little bit of metal use, around 7 million tons added to our stocks domestically is maybe not little, but maybe it is. We'll get to that point. But the extractive waste that we're left with for exporting the metal to China mainly, who then turn it into goods for the rest of the world, we're left with all the dumps full of mineral extraction waste in the country. We needed to dig into some of the metal sectors in a bit more detail to get a handle on how they interrelate and how the exports and domestic beneficiation debate plays out. So these are our three largest metal sectors in terms of tons of metal. And when we say 51 million tons of iron, we actually mean the iron within the iron ore that gets exported. So the iron ore exports wouldn't be 41 million tons, but about a third more, because there's oxygen with the iron as well. But yeah, so that's the accounting schemes, and we see the cycling of steel domestically that happens, the recycling also being a sizable portion of the little bit of recycling we have in the country. Yeah, so an economy that's materially dominated by export-oriented activities was one of the ways we characterized it. Then the fossil fuels, not very surprising. We extract coal domestically, we import oil and a little bit of gas. We export some coal, we use a lot of coal, and of course the other fossil fuels, mainly for energetic purposes, but we do make some plastics, and some of that is also recycled. And then interestingly, a sizable portion, 3.5 million tons of coal ash, also is reused or used into the construction sector. And so it really should go from being oranged to grey in the recycling loop. Right, so that's the fossil fuels. Energetically, this economy is still dominated by fossil fuels, and notably the domestic coal and then the imported oil. On the non-metallic mineral flows, this is the one where we're getting sizable stock add. So this is our concrete really that gets added in the main. So that's sand and gravel that gets extracted, and the various minerals that make cement. Yeah, no big surprises maybe in this one here. Couple of other findings that came out in terms of circular economy. There are pockets of good circularity. The metals we know have good value. They sometimes get recycled before they should, like the copper in the infrastructure on our railroads, which is a big problem. Also old gold mines that are being stripped out, metal being recycled there, which maybe is a good thing when they have reached the end of life. And then some where there is some recycling happening, but it can be challenging. High uncertainty, for example, around how much when there's demolition, how much clay brick actually gets taken out and repurposed. Possibly a bit of an overestimate here from our side, but yeah, these are things that are really uncertain in the big picture still. Plastics, there's some good work ongoing in terms of recycling, which Plastics SA will always tell us about, but and there's some good work in progress as well, but numbers still quite low. Container glass is probably one of the biggest success stories in circularity, because it's got both a very strong reuse and then a recycling loop. So double kind of loop happening. That was the only one where we could really find high incidence of reuse. So that was one of the other main findings then, that we have pockets of high circularity in the domestic economy. One bit, Linda, if there's still a minute or two, I haven't got my clock on the screen, so shout if I'm going over. But one of the findings that really struck us was that our domestic stock building is very low compared to other countries. Only 15% of what we extract becomes a stock addition in our economy, where it's 60% in the case of the EU. And when we looked at China in 1995, they were at 71% of what they extracted domestically, they added to their stock. And by 2015, that was bigger and larger as a percentage. So this worried us a bit. And also in absolute numbers, we add 2.3 tons of stock per person per year, and the EU adds 8 tons, and they already have a very rich built environment. So yeah, this is cause for concern. China also is adding a lot more stock to their economy. And it's not that we need to pour a lot of concrete into the landscape just so that we have tonnage of stock add. This is about the services that you can derive from adding stocks, all right? Roofs over people's heads so that they are dry and sheltered, pipelines and power cables and roads so that things can move and energy can move and water can arrive and sanitation can be removed or provided as a service. The stock add picture here is in tons per capita per year, and you can see we're doing slightly better, or we're doing better than our neighboring countries in sub-Saharan Africa. We're doing worse than Latin America and the Caribbean and all just about all other world regions. We're a bit similar to India, maybe. Right. So that's a sort of side picture. Yeah, to summarize our findings, I think I've said it all. Finding 1, material dominated by export-oriented activities. Finding 2, energetically dominated by fossil fuels. Finding 3, we have that sizable footprint of bio-based activities. There's some attention to ecological cycling, but there are very significant concerns whether we are improving or continuing to break our natural ecosystems that sit around this extraction of biomaterials. We have that finding about the low rate of domestic stock building, and then the finding that there are indeed some pockets of high circularity and also significant informal activity around cascade use, reuse and recycling. And other work that the Waste RDI does has all spoken to these things already in more detail. If we want to move to a circular economy, we really need to shift priorities in the national development model away from a very extractive and export focused model of the economy, where coal and metals earn us the money with which we will hopefully do something, right? So the Minister of Finance yesterday did acknowledge that we're in a better position because of the commodities boom, and we better use that money wisely and not just burn it on a party. Because we want to build an economy that looks more like the bottom picture, where there's less of a focus on digging stuff out the ground for others to have a good life, and to an economy where we build ourselves more stock add and more domestic use. And of course, when it reaches the end of the life, it's used in a circular way. And to get there, we really have to think hard about what that means for new businesses in the service sector, decent jobs and skill levels directed at this stronger domestic economy, lower environmental impacts, and how do we achieve that by shifting our focus away from just tonnages in mining, agriculture and transport to better urban planning, a new power sector, service-oriented economy. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much for your interest. Acknowledgements very much to the funder. We hope the information is become useful to you and the DSI. And yeah, also to the various experts who helped us to look over our first estimate and critique the work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harro, for those insights to the grant project on mapping the level of circularity of the South African economy. I think a couple of key points there. The first one, this is a first of its kind study for South Africa. As you said, this is a system level study, and again, highlighting the different scales and levels of research that the roadmap is funding. It also highlights the importance of international collaboration, of bringing South African research into the international environment and international research into the South African context. And lastly, the opportunities that we create for our postgraduate students in exposing them to international researchers and participating in these kinds of projects. So thank you for sharing your insights on that. I'm going to wrap up the session this afternoon, and I'm going to share with you just the last slide again. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our stakeholders who have joined us for the launch of the annual report this morning. I hope that you've enjoyed the session. As we've said, the annual report, the final version is already available. It's up online. You can access it via the URL provided on screen. Each of our grant holders, a very big thank you as well to you for making the time this morning to present the results of your recently completed studies, and it's exciting to see that your research has led to further research as well in this space. You can, our stakeholders can also access the research for each of these 3 grant projects on the specific pages that are allocated to them. And while you're on the Waste Roadmap website, please do have a look through the other research projects that have been funded over the years, and hopefully there's something there that's of interest to you that we can also take into practice on the ground. So with that, I'd like to thank